The scent of old paper and dust drifted through the attic, and Sophia's fingers traced the edges of a worn photo album. Each photograph was a doorway, a frozen moment in time, smiles half formed, eyes wide with the vulnerability of youth, the innocence before life's burdens had begun to settle. She lingered on a picture of herself at 7, standing beside her mother, her small hand clutching a toy she no longer remembered. The image felt alive, as if the girl in the photo were reaching out, calling to her across the years. Shadows of long forgotten arguments, whispered criticisms, and sudden silences stirred in her chest. Each memory carried a weight she had buried beneath accomplishments, distractions, and dreams of love. In the kitchen, she remembered the sharp edge of her father's disapproval, the way it could turn a simple mistake into a judgment that lingered in her bones. In the living room, she recalled the way her grandmother's warnings always came folded in love, but wrapped tightly around fear, shaping what she thought was safe and what she thought that she deserved. Sophia felt a chill, the realization settling slowly. These echoes were not just memories, they were patterns etched into her being, whispering through her choices and coloring her relationships, and echoing in her responses to love and to loss. She had carried the legacy of her family's fears, their expectations, and their unhealed wounds as if they were her own, and until now she had not seen the full measure of their influence. She sank onto the floor, surrounded by the photographs and relics of a life that had been lived in layers, some forgotten, some remembered too vividly. The shadows of the past pressed close, both accusing and intrusive, demanding that she look, that she feel, and that she acknowledge what had been hidden in the corners of her heart. And as she traced the edges of her own childhood in the dim light, Sophia understood. The journey forward could not begin until she faced the ghost of her beginnings. As Sophia sat among the relics of her past, a strange clarity began to form. Faces in the photographs no longer seemed like isolated memories, but pieces of a larger pattern. Her mother's tense posture, her father's silent withdrawals, her grandmother's weary eyes, all whispered a story she only had glimpsed in fragments. She realized that the anger she sometimes carried, the self-doubt that clawed at her in moments of intimacy, the fear of abandonment, those were not hers alone. They were echoes, inherited like a melody passed down through generations, each note shaped by survival, pain, and unspoken rules. In the quiet of her apartment, Sophia traced the lines of her family's history in her mind. She remembered her father's father, a man who had never learned to express tenderness, whose love came wrapped in rigid discipline. Her mother's mother, who had endured hardship silently, passing her own unspoken fears like heirlooms. Each generation had done what it could to survive, but the patterns had become cages, invisible yet binding. She saw herself in them, not just in the ways she had inherited pain, but in the resilience and strength that had been handed down alongside it. The realization was dizzying. The very behaviors she had judged herself for were echoes of survival, strategies for enduring that had long outlived their necessity. A mirror in the corner caught her reflection, and for a moment she saw more than her own face. She saw the faces of ancestors behind her, layered like translucent glass. She could feel their stories pressing against her soul, demanding recognition and asking to be understood. And in that recognition, Sophia began to feel the first threads of compassion for herself, not just as the child who had been shaped by these forces, but as the woman who could now choose differently. Patterns once invisible were now illuminated. The cycles of fear, control, and unspoken sorrow were no longer unknowable enemies. They were familiar, named, and ready to be addressed. Sophia breathed deeply, sensing that awareness itself was the first step towards liberation. The memories came rushing, unbidden and unstoppable. Sophia found herself back in the living room of her childhood home, the air thick with the tension that had long been buried. Her father's sharp voice rang through her mind, her mother's sighs heavy with unspoken disappointment, and the quiet judgment of relatives that she had once adored. Each sound pressed on her chest like a stone she had carried for decades. Tears came freely now, unrestrained and cleansing. She let herself feel the sting of every cruel word, Every moment she had been dismissed or misunderstood. She screamed silently, her body shaking, releasing grief that had been folded carefully into years of stoicism. The anger that she had once clutched tightly now poured out like molten water, burning away the last traces of denial. Sophia's hands trembled as she touched objects from her past: a doll with a missing arm, a notebook scrawled with childhood fears, letters that she had written and never sent. In each fragment, she confronted the echoes of her family's unhealed pain, and in each confrontation, a small liberation took root. She realized that the resentment she had carried was not hers to own alone. It was the inheritance of wounds passed down, now offered to her for acknowledgment and release. She screamed into the night, not in anger toward anyone, but towards the cycles themselves. "No more," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. And in that declaration, something shifted. The heaviness lifted slightly, replaced by the first flicker of understanding. Confronting the pain did not weaken her, it freed her. The catharsis was physical, spiritual, and emotional all at once. Sophia wept, laughed, trembled, and sighed in equal measure. The storm within her had not yet passed, but the first cracks of light were breaking through the clouds of grief. She felt raw, exposed, yet stronger for having faced the shadows directly. And as the night deepened around her, Sophia understood that this confrontation was not an end, it was an opening. By embracing the weight of her family's echoes, she had begun the work of untangling herself from their hold. The path to healing stretched before her, uncertain but illuminated by the fierce clarity of truth. The anger and grief that had consumed her in the night now softened into something quieter, more reflective. Sophia sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by the scattered fragments of her past: photographs, letters, small objects that had once held invisible weight. She breathed slowly, letting the rhythm of her own heart anchor her into the present. As she revisited the memories of her parents and grandparents, a new understanding began to bloom. Her father's harshness was not cruelty born of malice, but of fear: fear of inadequacy, fear of loss, and fear of repeating the mistakes of his own father. Her mother's silent judgments were shields, learned early in life to protect herself from vulnerability. Her ancestors had carried burdens far heavier than Sophia could have imagined, each coping mechanism passed down like a torch in the night. Sophia could see now how these patterns had shaped her. Yes, but she could also see the love that had been hidden beneath them, flawed, imperfect, but present. Each reaction, each unspoken rule, each inherited fear had been a form of survival, a strategy to navigate a world that demanded resilience and conformity. For the first time, she felt compassion for them and for herself. The anger and shame that had once felt like chains began to loosen, replaced by recognition. She understood that the cycle of pain had never been about blame, it had been about awareness. And awareness, she realized, was the beginning of liberation. In the quiet, Sophia whispered a silent acknowledgement to her ancestors. "I see you. I understand. I honor the journey that brought me here." And as she spoke, a subtle warmth spread through her chest, a sense of connection across time and lineage. The echoes of the past no longer felt like chains, but like threads, threads that she could now weave consciously, shaping patterns that reflected wisdom rather than suffering. The morning light spilled softly across her room, carrying a quiet promise. Sophia knelt among the relics of her past, rearranging them not as reminders of pain, but as symbols of awareness and transformation. She breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the lineage she carried, and for the first time met it with intention rather than resistance. She whispered to herself, to her ancestors, to the unseen threads that connected them: "I choose to see clearly. I choose to release what no longer serves us. I choose love over fear." Each word felt like planting a seed in fertile soil, small and fragile, yet brimming with potential. Sophia imagined the patterns that she had inherited: the fear, the anger, the self-doubt, dissolving like morning mist, replaced by conscious choices, kindness, presence, and courage. She saw herself as the conduit for change, the bridge between what had been and what could be. Every act of healing she committed to, every boundary she set, every compassionate thought toward herself and her family was a ripple that would move across generations. She held a small candle in her hands, lighting it as a ritual of affirmation. Its flame was delicate, flickering, but unwavering. "This is the fire I choose to carry forward," she thought. Not the fire of the pain, but the fire of transformation. As she watched the candles glow, Sophia felt a sacred responsibility settle in her chest, not as a burden, but as a gift. She was the living testimony that cycles could be broken, that wounds could be acknowledged and healed, and that love could flow where fear once reigned. And in that quiet, deliberate act of planting seeds, Sophia felt the lineage shift beneath her touch. The echoes of the past remained, yes, but they were no longer chains. They were lessons, guides, and reminders that she had the power to write a new story, one of compassion, clarity, and healing. And for her, this chapter closed with her sitting in the gentle light, candle burning steadily, heart open, ready to step forward fully into the path that she had begun to forge, a path of conscious transformation and enduring hope.